Because companies today face new opportunities and are moving towards transforming business models. The role of companies in this technological revolution that the world is undergoing is extremely important in the development of society. From Seattle, United States, we welcome Orlando Ayala. He's international consultant and member of the International Wiseman Mission. He's a Colombian and worked several years with Bill Gates as a member of his directive team. In later years with Microsoft, he was in China, where he expanded the presence and strategy of the company in over 20 cities. And from Baltimore, we have Mr. Orlando Ayala, joined by Julio Rojas Sarmiento in this case, Executive VP of Bank of Bogota, helping us to think about the corporate future vision to, to introduce this conference called Management in Disruptive Times. So I leave you in the company of Dr. Carlos Varela, Technical Vice President of Fasecolda. We welcome the three of you. Good morning. Good morning, and thank you for accompanying us in this third and final day of our virtual convention. I accompany you here from the studio where we are being physically here for this conference. And Dr. Miguel will join later. He's right now at the president's office, and from which, along with the president, they will be closing our event today. In the meantime, I want to welcome Orlando Ayala. And Mr. Rojas, thank you for being here with us today. I know Orlando is in Seattle. I know Julio, you are in Baltimore. And with this virtual world now and the opportunity that we have thanks to technology, I would really like to thank you once again for accepting this invitation and being with us today. So without further ado, Julio and Orlando, the floor is yours. Good morning, everybody. Julio and Carlos, everybody, good morning. And I would like to start our conversation. I know there's a video you want to show first, so let's do that.
Once upon a time, business as usual was often good enough. No more. Where we are going, good enough is dead. In a world where everything is connected, where everything is equally excellent, where performance is reaching perfection, there's only one space left to innovate in: you. Right now, you are a central point in the raging tornado of change fueled by digitization, mobilization, augmentation, disintermediation, automation. Well, the list goes on. Science fiction is becoming science fact. Think about self-driving cars or computers that can learn and think. The way we work will never be the same. The skills we need will be dramatically different. Winning or losing are now happening faster than ever before. So what's your response? How will you discover new opportunities in one of the most transformational times in human history? Are you driving change, or are you being driven by it? Disruption has become the new normal. With change, it's always gradually, then suddenly, well, things really have stopped happening gradually. This change is exponential. Everything that used to be dumb and disconnected is now wired and intelligent. Cars, cities, ports, farms, even our bodies will be wired with sensors and will talk to each other. These game changers are also combinatorial. They amplify each other, creating a perfect storm of change. Quantum computing fuels big data. The Internet of Things fuels artificial intelligence and deep learning, which fuels robotics. However, anything that cannot be digitized or automated will become extremely valuable. Human-only traits such as creativity, imagination, intuition, emotion, and ethics will be even more important in the future, because machines are very good at simulating, but not at being. Yes, robots and software will do some of our work, but this will allow us to focus on things that cannot be automated. To imagine change squared, You've got to start engaging more with what might be, not just with what is. Immerse yourself in the immediate future, 5 to 7 years out from today. We need to go beyond technology and data to reach human insights and wisdom. Technology represents the how of change, but humans represent the why. The future is about holistic business model. The opportunity is to be liquid, to learn just in time, not just in case, not single improvements, but complete transformations, not individual systems, but new ecosystems. Humanity is where true and lasting value is created. We will engage, relate, and buy things because of the experiences they provide, because of their transformative power. The future doesn't just happen, the future gets happened. The new way to work is to embrace technology, but not to become it. The future is in technology, yet the bigger future lies in transcending it. Let's live and lead from here.
Okay, if you can see my screen once again. Very good morning to all of you from Seattle in the east coast of the U.S. My congratulations to Fasecolda for bringing us to have a venue to ponder on such things. Of course, it's challenging times globally. I think that's an understatement that we all have clear. But although there's so many questions, we really have some deep questions that apply to all industries and all institutions. These interrogatives start perhaps with a very simple question, which is, what should I do? What is going to happen next? And how should I transform myself? Which is a very individual question. It's also a nation level question, as it's a question for every institution or org. And this video about technology, as and how it tries to portray, is important to understand from the point of view of human impact and the capacity to be able to create and amplify the human being in all its extent, in all its possibilities, thinking of it, what surrounds human beings. And the question is this all of this going to be available for everybody or only for some of us? And I have about 30 minutes trying to land and connect among all these technological discussion. How is it possible to arrive to a precise point where we can define what are the elements to consider in an organized manner and in a strategic fashion? I'm sure yesterday in the presentation, I don't know how many of you heard Rob Galbraith's presentation with his book, The End of Insurance as We Know It. So I'm not an insurance expert myself. I've been working 40 years in tech, and I'm sure yesterday you heard from Rob about a bunch of scenarios that apply to insurance, but perhaps I can take a step back to land these concepts that I consider and to ground these concepts that I consider are important to reposition an organization or even reposition yourself individually looking at the future. And this goes through this first element, since we're in the first time in human history, we're having a technological convergence and digital that is unheard of. This is happening at the same time where there's a great divergence globally from the geopolitical point of view, from the cultural and social and economic aspects. And these are two phenomena that are equally necessary, but that bring us such great questions about how transformations should take place for orgs and people to continue moving forward. So let me try and simplify some of these concepts about technology, where it's my belief that it's important to consider them, to think about how are we utilizing them in the best way, and how are we incorporating them to the strategic development of an org. And I want to refer now to the big digital convergence first. And I say big digital convergence, I'm not talking about big technological convergence. I will get there, but let's start with the digital convergence. We hear about the fourth industrial revolution and everything that it brings with it, but in my opinion, there's four forces or aspects in this revolution that are crucial. And when I look at them independently, they're very powerful by themselves, but when they combine themselves is when you really have this convergence that has a deep transformative power that will generate this huge transformation from for all institutions. I think none of them will be unaffected. So let's start with these four. The first one is, of course, ultra connectivity. In this context, the forecast is that for 2050, we will have 50 billion of devices or intelligent sensors from, I don't know, transmitting from my shirt perhaps, or mobile phones that we already have, and sensors. I'm sure you've heard yesterday a lot about how sensors will be relevant to measure the behavior of people in the insurance industry as well, to understand your risk factors perhaps. But what I want to say here is that we're in a process of ultra connectivity where each atom, everything we touch as atoms, has the capacity of becoming smart. And that's something that had no precedent in our history. Second is the network effect. And here I don't refer to social networks only. I'm talking about the fact that the capacity to connect and ultra connect by definition includes this network concept where there's communication from device to device, from sensor to sensor, on many occasions without the intervention of human beings themselves. This is how we have a network effect. In the end, that allows for analysis capability in each point, in a node or a point in this network, if you will, since the moment you generate a product until it is finally consumed. Third, we have the situation where for the first time in industry or human history, we have the capacity to compute, unlimited computing capacity, both in storing as in processing. So that's current computational capacities. And when we talk about quantum computing, I don't want to go into the details, but we are really at almost at the edge of a leap in a deep change where computational elements will help us solve problems that were previously unattainable through this architecture and the analysis of millions and millions of data elements almost instantaneously. And these three combine with the fourth element that I'm sure all of you have heard of this term. Many people call it the new petrol, where, of course, when you refine it, you can have very valuable products. But essentially, the amount of information generated today in the world or in the last 5 years is the equivalent of the information generated in all of human history. At that speed, is the generation of data growing, combined with the other three aspects of ultra connectivity, networks, and limited computing capacity. So when a lot of people speak about the fourth industrial revolution, but when what's really happening is the convergence of these four vectors in a dramatic way, clashing together to provide development and transformation scenarios like we've never seen before. And now shifting away from these four, I want to focus in what I call the three more, not scenarios, but let's say usable tools for transformation that have to do with the following. First, and as you know, humans are communicating all the time, essentially, not just with our voice, but also in our gestures, and actually communication can be much more effective sometimes through gestures and other aspects. And I can read someone's intentions and many things. So thinking of the previous four elements, computation allows us for computing systems to actually have the opportunity, the capacity now of being able to look at language almost in the way that humans do. Not only interpret the voice of people, but also the behavior and shifting of your face gestures, for example. So this natural language is key because the capacity to recreate business models and the capacity through which I can interact and offer products that interact with a user in such a way that this language is implicitly recognized by a machine is now a reality. The second that I'm sure Rob must have mentioned it yesterday, and that's saying that human beings essentially learn from manipulating elements. So breaking apart an engine is easier than reading a book about how an engine works, and it's much easier from the point of view of when you physically need to put the engine back together, of course. But thinking of the initial four vectors I described, we have now this capacity of creation of augmented reality and mixed reality as an essential objective in transformation from many new business models that are coming into being. I think the automotive industry is clearly impacted by this, where the design of a new automobile now is actually made at an excessively low cost, where previously you had to do it pretty much with clay, and work yourself to mold the new model of car that you were going to put out. But now we have this mixed reality that combines the physical reality with the digital reality to generate highly immersive experiences. And this will touch and affect all industries. Finally, education is going to be highly potentiated through this type of tools. And finally, and many of you should have read about the combination of these four initial elements I mentioned, plus the latest two, bring us to what is called the new electricity. And it's called the new electricity because it's going to have the same level of effect and impact in terms of new social and cultural models being developed, and economic models as well, even geopolitical. And that, of course, brings us to IA. So if someone asked me to condense this topic of digital convergence and what are we talking about in layman's terms here, I try to capture the elements that any strategy of any institution, and by institution I mean a government, a company, and even your family, these are all elements that will be affecting us in this process of reinventing ourselves, really, at least in our capacity of being to be more effective in achieving the potential of institutions or individuals. And I've talked so far about the great digital convergence, but if I had to choose and pick one concept from everything I've mentioned so far, I would say that we are going into essentially the cognitive computational era. The fact that computers or the let's call it technology has this much more profound closeness as far as the capacity to emulate as humans and the way we process and the way we consume information for value generation, hopefully. I mean, by value generation, I mean from the production of art to the production of a new invention. But I think it's important to understand that from the concept of reconfiguring new models, and we are looking at the era of cognitive computational era because of artificial intelligence, because of the way these systems interact without human intervention. So this cognitive computational definition, I think, is critical. But I was talking about digital convergence and using this term, and when I talked about cognitive convergence, and when I talk about what it represents, and we are really touching into the topic of the essence of what a human being is: understand, learn, interact, and live. So moving from the digital to the technological, and I want to make that differentiation. We say that the great convergence, the huge convergence that we see, is really not digital but technological. Not just digital but technological. And the technological convergence is easily defined as the intersection between four areas of human knowledge that never before intersected themselves in analysis and research like we did previously. It's the interaction between biotechnology, nanotechnology, cognitive sciences, and information technologies. And that's what I refer to as digital convergence. And when I speak of biotech, I'm talking about cellular genesis, I'm talking about nanotechnology. We mean atoms and molecules. And when we speak of cognitive sciences, we're talking about neurons. This combined with information technologies is the greatest event in technological advancement in the history of mankind. For the first time, we are at the forefront of the capacity of being able to understand enigmas such as Alzheimer as big challenge of the human being as far as we age. But that's just one example. This intersection that not just goes through the digital aspect, but all these other areas, if you see, truly represents what we are as human beings: atoms, cells, neurons. And we combine this with cognitive computation itself. We really have the leap, or the type of leap that I'm referring to. Hence this topic of technological convergence. And I did say, and it's an element that I can decide that I don't want to be knowledgeable about it. I don't want to know about this. But I'm convinced, I believe I'm not alone, that each industry will somehow be changed radically on account of this big convergence that is at our doorstep and is accelerating. Some people are saying, well, this will happen, but maybe 20 years in the future. I say this is the happening right now, and whoever takes the drop on this quicker than others will be at an advantage point. Is this an industry that has not transformed radically as far as the use of digital technologies for many reasons? I'm sure you've discussed this in the past 2 days. But I believe that the insurance industry has such a critical component that can bring it close to this big convergence. All industries have an emotional component, but I think there's nothing more emotional than facing a situation where you have a very personal challenge. It can be a health issue. It can be an accident. It can be because your house just burnt down. So if we speak essentially of cognitive computation and feelings and the emotional aspect, this insurance industry is one that every day is facing these moments of truth, if you may, and the capacity of the industry to reinvent itself around these topics will set a trend between those that are leaders today and will be leaders tomorrow, and you have the technology to do this today. And it exists because, and once again, for the first time in humanity, the history of humanity, and I really believe in this, the generation of wealth, and wealth not just being money. I speak about the wealth in its a global continent of what you can understand, including happiness there also. So it's the first time where wealth is being generated, not just from the use of raw materials that become then products and then have value and provide a service, but where raw materials are the behavior and the actions of human beings. This is the big breaking point in society that has very positive things and very challenging ethical questionings that need to be analyzed very precisely, very punctually. And today, that generation of algorithms is really questioning how ethical are the algorithms that many are developing when they are basically feeding from human behavior through the use of information and data in a very granular way that has even changed the way in which we look at the results of presidential elections in the United States in 2016, for example, when 70,000 people in the United States were micro-analyzed and micro-segmented by a political party to flip or armed with this information that was perhaps not necessarily not wrong information, but let's say perhaps biased information to alter human behavior. So we are really at the forefront for the first time with the possibility of generating wealth by using human behavior and sentiment as the first element to generate this. And like I said before, no industry will be left unaffected from this challenge or opportunity. And this morning when you woke up, I'm sure you grabbed your mobile phone, you looked at it. It's one of the first things you did. And I mean, all I want to say is that this is unescapable. It's become a reality. And when we look at behavior analysis, it's all the time more detailed, it becomes more efficient and more sophisticated about everything we do. And we are part of this process. And that's how I talk about this topic, because I believe there's no going back, in the sense that many societies and cultures and the companies themselves need to rethink themselves in this context of understanding that we not only have our identity, like I'm Orlando Ayala, but next to me there's a digital Orlando Ayala, the one that's basically protected by, human rights and all these things, and then the digital Orlando Ayala that perhaps, or not perhaps, but really doesn't have such a defined protection as the one that's flesh and bone in front of you right now. And I introduced this concept where in the next 10 minutes, I want to talk about what to do. That's a big question. What to do with all of this? What to do with this situation that's irreversible from the point of view of this technological convergence that is basically changing and transforming absolutely everything at an unheard speed? That's the question. What should we do? What actions are to be taken? In this way, I start by saying, well, if someone were to ask me, and someone mm, uh, recently, I have had several meetings with boards and different groups asking, what should we do with all of this? And after discussing all this technology and after understanding a little bit what are the pieces that are the most powerful ones and the vectors of greatest impact, that's fine. But then any institution today must comprehend that that impact I've referred to goes through three key concepts in the redesign of our new society that we will see and the new business models. First one, we're at the face of the capacity of personalizing 7 days, 20, 24 hours per day, and then making this more custom fit and more technologies being more and more personalized. The second one is disintermediation. As great technological convergence is moving towards eliminating the intermediary that doesn't generate any value, especially in supply chains and in value chains in general. So a big question I ask is, am I taking away an intermediary or am I being taken out as an intermediary? For example, in the transportation industry, Uber is a great example of eliminating intermediaries. I've been in the travel agencies, I haven't talked to a travel agent for years without human interaction anymore. The financial sector, I know Julio will go into this in the last 30 minutes. All of this is going through disintermediation. The question is, am I taking out an intermediary or are they going to take me out as an intermediary? And the last factor is decentralization, where for the first time, we find ourselves at a point where in the periphery is where we see all the power shifts, not in the center. And social networks is a big example of decentralization. Twitter, huge example of decentralization, where traditional media had all the control, but with 200 and something characters only, we decentralized the message and now you empower people that are consuming this information to actually be the ones that generate this information. So I would say if I have a business, doesn't matter how big or small it is, even if I'm a country of my own, what does this represent? Can I personalize and configure my information with each individual citizen? Yes. How? So all this process, I think, is understood. The concept can be understood, but I see very little formality in analyzing these three elements and bringing them down to more practical things and beyond the technologies I mentioned previously. And and a bit more practical. And how do I think about new business models using this? So I think it's a mandatory exercise for any institution, bigger or smaller orgs, is how do you rethink your business model depending on these three things: personalization, disintermediation, and decentralization. This exercise, and this is a very quick exercise. I'm not going to teach you anything here. You're experts in this topics of insurance. But in this path of the non-digital to the digital extreme, your industry in particular needs to rethink all the distribution channels and the business models and the processes and the products and services associated and your segments and your clients associated to this. But always using the exercise, and I make this question to illustrate this in these meetings with people in charge of the strategy of a company or an institution or a country. And I asked them, can you tell me who your audience is in detail and what are the scenarios that those audiences are really reflecting as the most important for them, for you to rebuild your business around them? And amazingly, I find that this answer, not a real answer, it's a very high level answer. And you can say, yes, I have consumer the surveys, I have my vendors, and that's a little bit the level that you're talking about. But precisely because of personalization, disintermediation, and decentralization, the analysis of audiences and their segments and the breakdown of each segment, doesn't matter if you're big or small, is an absolutely strategic activity now that needs to be taken from the directive board meeting and brought down all the way down in your org to answer this question. Who is your audience? What are the scenarios? And in your insurance industry, there's particular spaces or areas that are very emotional and uh, almost about survival, really. But I believe that the generation and the dissemination of an audience analysis and different scenarios to produce the experiences and products and services that are predictive, that are intuitive, that are regenerative, immersive, and self-service oriented is absolutely necessary. And it's a task that today any organization needs to engage in if you don't want to basically become irrelevant on account of this digital convergence that will be used by so many others to do this work in a very precise and punctual way. And the owners of this is really four companies in the US and four companies in China. And understand this audience and scenarios using data like no one has ever done in a great with great regularity where you attach the scenario to see how you can change a person's behavior and buy something on thanks to this capacity that they have. So you ask me for a task or a homework, I say your main task is to do a strategic, broad exercise starting by the directive board and each individual member there and involved in the whole organization. In this definition of what is your audience really? Who are they? And what's important to them? And how can I convert this into value in this uh, line from the non digital to the totally digital? So I want to start closing up because there's 7 minutes or less. Going back to the initial question. So big question mark. You ask me, what's different, right? There were many things that were already becoming very different before the COVID pandemic, but what's the really different that's coming up, and what should we think about the context of rethinking our organization and reestablishing your differentiation capabilities? And then going to the next level, I would say it's three things also. And maybe you can say one of these three things, oh, that's not really important for me, but I want to give you a context with the three things. And I want to start with the first one that I pretty much covered. This technological aspect needs to be in your agenda like never before. I think that topic's covered. I'm part of the Ecopetrol, the third biggest insurance company in the U.S., and the Smithsonian, the Natural History Museum, and in those boards. I'm in those boards in the topic of defining audiences and scenarios for differentiating. But let's take an additional point where at an institution and board level, we created an information and innovation committee, just like you have the auditing committee or the financial committee, the human resource committee, perhaps. This is the moment where no institution can escape from formally creating at a board level a committee that's looking at technology in a precise way and connected to the government, connected to the strategic process of the organization is what I wanted to say. And if we understand that this big data, artificial intelligence paradigms, everything that I talked about, then the second element in this strategy becomes more obvious because that's how in the world I'm going to evolve in my strategy. Or more than ever, I believe you define your audiences, the scenarios, and what product I intend to develop to differentiate myself. Then the question is, do I have the talent to do this? And talent goes for many things experience and the four elements I described, data and mobility and so forth. Do I have people that can understand this, or can I do this through affiliating myself with others. But do I have the right talent? It's a deep question that you need to work on deeply, basically tied to the definition of value from new products and services and the scenarios that I was talking about in this context of high personalization and custom fit and decentralization and disintermediation. So the talent issue is critical. More than ever, a company needs to declare its ethical purpose regarding the use of technology. And there's very little expertise in the world on this. If I have a group that's developing a series of algorithms that is going to define some things to provide a loan for a person, I'm developing these algorithms in such a way that they're not biased, that they're ethical. Once again, the right talent is a topic that you need to think deeply about. And then the reaction of many can be, this is not going to affect me. And I say it will touch you because we're facing the biggest geopolitical redefinition in the history of mankind as well. In the 12th century, we started seeing the generation of this Western culture. And the most important, most significant event we've seen in events is China appearing in the geopolitical map. China has invested in the past 15 years in many of these technologies and is even uh, much more ahead than the US in many of these topics. China is essentially the first producer of sustainable power. At least they've been 10 years leading the US, and even we in Latin America depend a lot on fossil fuels. We're asking ourselves, how are we going to engage in the shift? How are we going to work in favor, climate change not being so affected? And when you looking at social environment, social aspects, and now the institutionality governance, and people talk about this as ESG, environmental, social, and governance. But I would I would actually include a P. That's what we did in the Ecopetrol company. We put the P in front that accompanies that economic, social, and governance. So it's TESG using technology because what I'm saying is that this China issue is very important because we're all been touched in our supply chains by China, and China is betting fundamentally and very clearly betting on using technology and producing the talent now. Today, China is producing more engineers in computer science by a factor of 10 times more than the United States. And this is just a conversation in itself, just to talk only about China. But it's important that in the strategic understanding of any organization, you include this angle of worldwide dislocation that's irreversible because China will be the greatest economic power in the world by 2030, very shortly. And then when we talk about food sustenance and technological dependence and everything else that comes associated. So I want to close with this last slide, understanding what this represents for Colombia. What does it represent for LATAM and emerging countries that, by the way, are in China's agenda in a very clear way? That's the question. And I would say all of this will take place with Colombia or without Colombia taken into play, with Latin America or without Latin America, with or without any country. The question is, what are we going to do? And how do we think about this to change the structure of our economies that are profoundly of extractive nature to be knowledge uh, economies? I was in the Wiseman report. I think it's a very interesting report that we delivered as far as thinking what Colombia can bet on, thinking of the bioeconomics of Colombia, as being one of the most biodiverse countries, and essentially transforming this in products in the generation of food products. And Latin America. Latin America can essentially be, the area where all these products are generated, and then we can see how valid value can be present there, like caffeine and others that can be using plastic that is renewable in other products. And you can basically become the pantry for the whole world. So this is not a moment to watch the game from the bleachers. I think any company now private or not, is large or small, government owned or not. It's a time to understand the strategic component and how to answer in the best way that at the same time is a big threat for all of us. So thank you once again for having me, and I think we're going to have a discussion with Julio.
To the organizers of Asecola for their invitation. Okay, Julio, how are you? Good. Can you hear me? Yes, I can hear you perfectly. Great. Okay, so thanks a lot to all the organizers for this invitation. Orlando, a pleasure to talk to you. And let's kick it off. Yeah, very well. Okay. Well, first of all, thanks of all for your time to listen about my reflection. And honestly, I would like to put this on the table. And it's about the industry that you represent. This is an institution of that is highly visible, the Bank of Bogota in Colombia. And taking into account maybe other elements that I addressed at the end that I consider to be important, I specifically, the financial aspect has to do with disintermediation being very important. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about what the Bank of Bogota is doing, or any other remark that you would like to make in terms of the reflections that I have shared. Yes, of course. The first thing I would say is that for Banco de Bogota, this is a very special year because, in fact, it is our 150th birthday or anniversary. It was founded in 1870, and we were prepared to celebrate that great anniversary this year. And of course, what has happened in this year has radically changed all of the different expectations in terms of what was going to be a year of celebration to becoming a year of reaction and dramatic changes. But why am I getting to this? Well, because what an organization shows that can survive 150 years is that we have had to go through good moments, bad moments, and different kinds of moments, in fact. And clearly, I fully agree with you, Orlando, that we are living through a time of transformation that is deep, a deep transformation in many senses of the word, led by technology. But if we think throughout time, we have always seen challenges and we have always seen different moments in time where, as an entity or as an industry, we have to evolve or we have to set back or fall behind. And I think that this moment is different because I don't think it is similar to the moments we have lived in the past. It is the speed of change that things are taking place in, and that speed of change obeys to what is known in the scientific world as Murph law. And it is that the increase of changes and the calculational power is exponential. It is not linear. And explorations specifically refer to this to the size of chips and the size of what we can include in a circuit board. But what this allude to is that we are living through a huge acceleration moment of changes that you just mentioned. And I also believe that there are key challenges around the customization, decentralization, disintermediation, as you mentioned. And in fact, you are sharing with us what we believe is the formula to try to combat or fight against those challenges that we are facing. And the first of these has to do with talent. There is no substitute to lure or to retain and to foster talent within an organization. And that talent brings with it a culture, a cultural change, if you will, that is necessary in order to face these changes. So that cultural change, specifically in the financial industry, for example, is that we have to understand that different to the way we used to operate in the past, which was an industry highly regulated with very few participants, with barriers at the beginning or entrance, not artificially, by the way, because they existed, because one has a huge responsibility as a financial or banking agency to protect the deposits of our customers. At the end of the day, that is our biggest responsibility that we have as bankers. But what we are noticing is that new technology is facilitating new ways of having the same security and have a much friendlier and faster service. And this is a cultural change that is large. It's not that we are doing a favor to the customers for working with us, but it's actually the other way around. The customers are doing a favor to us or for us because they lend us that trust. They give us that trust and to make those deposits. So given this situation and that change in the mindset, what refers to a fast mentality, a technique of specific development. But in this case, what I'm trying to say is that changes are taking place at such a fast speed that requires a level of talent and a level of understanding of these new technologies that are very deep. So the first point or item to fight those trends, for example, around disintermediation, is to have a pool of talent that is very strong, very deep. So there we have a challenge. We have a challenge not only as companies, but also as a country. And this is part of what we talked about in the mission of the wise persons that you participated in. And we see the results of this. And as a country, we have a huge challenge of continued training this talent and to help so that our Colombian population that has a high level of capacity and innate talent to activate it with the tools that are key to participate in this new economy. I'm talking about code development, I'm talking about English, and the importance of these two things that go jointly because codes are written in English. So we have to have a level of proficiency that is important. Data to understand what are those new technologies that enable data. And that's why initiatives like the ones President and Duque has and the government that were recently announced by way of the Ministry of the Information and Technology in terms of training 100,000 developers is essential. It is essential so that we can continue making progress and that becomes a virtuous circle. So I believe that I would start from there. Yes, let me reflect on something you just mentioned because I've been reading a little bit about insurance, and we all know that the huge challenge of these industries has to do with legacy because there's a lot of legacy, a lot of documents in paper. So moving this can be extremely dangerous. And so then comes in the fear as to how to do this. But let's talk about your industry. And in a way, let's have a parallel to the insurance industry. But in the case of Nubank, an institution that is completely young, if you will, that has no single branch office. And we're just simply based on a premise, and it is to eliminate, to remove that or disintermediate paper, to do all the different processes and make them efficient. And this requires to sit down to create a culture to eliminate or remove paper. So there are moments of truth that I believe that the insurance issue is an industry that lives of moments of truth where you either see yourself well or not well, depending on what happens. So I wanted to ask you in Nubank context, how do you see the financial industry or the bank? And maybe if we can do a parallel with the insurance aspect. I'm not an expert on this, but I know that they have the same issues. How do you, for example, see the bank? How does Banco de Bogota see the Nubank? For those of you who have not read about its history, well, this could be a case that could be an opportunity. So go ahead. Yes. Okay. First of all, I believe that David Velez, who is the Colombian entrepreneur, in fact, that started up. Well, he's a great entrepreneur, by the way, and they have created. Well, he was born in Brazil, but he's Colombian. Yes. Well, he created a very, very strong company, and impressive company in Brazil, and they announced that they're coming this week to Colombia. And my first reaction to this is that he's welcome. I mean, I believe that competition allows all of us to increase our levels, to up our levels, and whoever wins here is the Colombians, basically, and that's positive. So first of all, I am a firm believer in terms of the importance of this competition and the importance of challenging ourselves to up our levels. Now, something important that you just mentioned, and you're all right about it, is the legacy. I would say that this is a double-edged sword, and you mentioned the negative part, which is completely true. that when you design in our technological architecture from scratch, well, it's much easier to reincorporate or incorporate new elements of technology that exist versus trying to transform something that already exists. But on another note, that legacy, well, there are some very important points, specifically in industries such as the banking industry, where trust, at the end of the day, is the most critical point that allows the industry to work. And the trust of knowing that there is a brand that has been present in the country for 150 years. In fact, we founded the banking sector, the private banking sector in Colombia, that doesn't see Colombia as an additional country, but as its main country, and that has been accompanying companies and people for over 150 years now. That is also a huge advantage, and it should not be disregarded. I would say, in addition to this, you mentioned the branch offices, and one of the interesting points is that many technological companies are sold or sell themselves by saying that it is positive that they don't have branches, but they're online. And by having this, they have lesser costs, and this is transferred to their customers, so there is a better product to offer. I believe that what the world has shown is that that philosophy of only attending people through channel, whether it's call center, branch offices, or ATMs, this has not seemed to be the development of that trend with the best technological companies in the world. For example, Amazon, which could be the best example to show that, or Apple or Microsoft, what's more, the importance of a physical presence that is real. And I believe one should not be thinking just about one or one other channel, but a omni-channel strategy. And this strategy should be led not only by using a single channel because this is cheaper and because like this and because people like this channel, but because I have to have a wide range of offerings that allow me to address the needs of our customers in each channel, depending on their needs. And what we traditionally see, and just to close this aspect on the banking industry, is that people like to interact in different channels. Very little time, few times do you see a journey of a customer in a single channel, but instead they log into the internet to find out about something, then they go to the branch office to ask questions personally, or maybe they contact the call center because they have a specific question. So what we have to do is that to have a better experience in each one of these channels. And I recognize there is a challenge there, and this is part of what we have done, to say that it is incoherent to have a digital transformation only aimed at a digital channel. Instead, what is required is a digital transformation to up the levels of all the channels and be able to offer an experience that is just as good in any channel. And we have a challenge there. And use that transformation to be able to reduce the cost of operation and to be able to offer better prices to our customers. Well, let me tell you about my experience. Maybe 15 years ago, I haven't been in a branch office in the past 15 years for any serious thing. And I would say that maybe the concept here that once again applies to insurance, or that we all have, is the topic of convenience, to make it simple. The channel is there, but I would say that the concept of convenience, of doing things in a simple fashion, I think this is an absolute challenge for insurance. Sometimes I get my statement and I see that I have been charged for something, but there is no true explanation as to why that charge went up. So I believe that this concept of using technology to understand that convenience and customization can truly create a giant leap in that sense. Yeah, I fully share this concept. What I would say, in addition to this, and of course, being a person from Microsoft for many years, well, you're a person that is close to technology, but we also have to think what the population thinks about in terms of the 50 million Colombians, which is the bank of these Colombians that attends or addresses all the different segments in the different regions. What I considered to be convenient is not the same case for all. And here you touch a very important aspect, and it has to do with the customization. And I do believe that one can have a very good experience, that is convenient by way of different channels. But clearly, the digital channel will only continue to have more and more relevance and importance, and that is where we are focused in. Yes, and that is the challenge. And I believe that just being an expert in technology, the challenge is the other way around. How can you make it so easy that, but by using technology, the QR, for example, the QR code, that's a huge example of this. And by way of having a phone, and technology can activate something quickly with high efficiency. Yeah, QR is a good example because it combines both tips of the spears. First, as you say, uh, an ease of how to use QR, but on the other side, to put a sticker on a retail, it's almost at the cost of zero. And by costing zero, it will allow me to reduce the cost that we have to charge. And by reducing these costs that we have to charge, well, this will allow us to have more banking activities and empowerment of population. That should clearly be one of the objectives in this case. Yes, and summarizing this, speed, intensity, and cost. I think that is the trident that creates a situation of opportunity. Yes, and that mindset of putting the client at the center of things, and that change in the chip mindset. We are competing for the customer's attention, and that is where we have to be very strong in our strategy versus this intermediation. One cannot, in my opinion, become a white label behind, but instead we have to be the company that has a relationship with the customer. And the only way today to keep up a relationship with our customers is to be an agency, whether it's in the banking or insurance agency or industry, offering reasonable prices with convenience. Yeah, we're talking about audiences and scenarios. Something happened to me just recently. I was traveling. I haven't traveled since February, of course, due to obvious reasons, but I wasn't able to get a business class ticket. And all of a sudden, the the lady comes and says, "Look, I know you don't eat beef, but I don't want you to be without the dish or the meal that you prefer." So somebody knew that I had a certain budget to for traveling and that I was sitting in such and such seat and this could cost. But the fact of audiences, segmentation, and products and services, that is the most important exercise around what you say. And it is the audience at the center. I wouldn't say customer or client at the center, but the audience. The provider experience is as important as the customers. I don't know if you have a question. Well, I also share the aspect on segments and audience. And I believe that I go back to something that I mentioned previously, and it is that that concept is not new. And if you start thinking about different industries, and then the example that I like to use because it's obvious, is that we have to think in the clothing industry. In the clothing industry or fashion industry, it's not a one size fits all. It's not that you just make a T-shirt and everybody wears it. No, because let's say it's the only T-shirt that you make. There has been a development of that industry for different sizes. And that's the easiest one because we understood with our hands how to have a shirt of different sizes. In the services industry, insurance, banking, technology, airlines, it's not that we didn't know about the importance of doing what you just mentioned, for example, in your trip, but instead what happened is that we didn't have that capability of doing it at the level that was necessary. All the industries, well, have been having segmentations for since ever, from the premium sector, the affluent, massive, and others. But those segments at that level of generality is is not for example, a premium person is not similar to the other person, premium person. A person in the massive or the mass sector could be radically different to another person who is graded as massive due to socioeconomic demographics or thousands of axes that you can cut through. And I believe that there is a huge opportunity Yes, I agree. The truth is that very few have a defined structure or strategy. We're almost falling short on time, but yeah, I've been married for 38 years now. So the question is always, oh my gosh, what am I going to give her, for this anniversary? So I went to the stores, and I went into a store that makes candles, those that have a scent to it and everything. And I said, yeah, but it costs $25. But anyway, it's just a small token of appreciation. So I go out and pay, and that you can actually customize that candle. So I took a picture when we were 16 years old. They printed it, they put it on the candle, and said, I'm going to pay double for that because this is an example as to how somebody, when I was about to pay, they had an element that caused that capability, that of being able to make a difference and to create a different experience. Now, one additional question, I don't know if you have any question, maybe we can exchange. And this has to do with corporate governance in the context of technology, because in this transformation of audiences, I would say that we are moving to a world where human behavior and data are the most important input for the creation of differentiation in wealth. So how can we create this? How do you see this from your experience at the bank with regards to the development of ethical algorithms? I'm pretty sure that you as bank developed this. There is a declaration on behalf of the bank that is written and established that says that this is the way as to how we make algorithms to avoid things such as, I don't know, bias or discrimination or these things. How do you see it? Well, institutions don't have this nowadays in the US. Well, yes, indeed. There is an issue dealing with ethics regarding how to handle data. And I believe that that starts from a primary point, and it is that data belongs to each individual. It doesn't belong to the entity or agency that you are affiliated with for the banking or financial services. The data is personal to each individual. And the company has to ensure the reliability and confidence of this information. But second of all, the use of this data should not go against a person or should not be against a person. And we have seen scandals on a global scale in the US from the best companies, from the best banks. In fact, that it wasn't intentional. I think that most of the people nowadays are not writing algorithms seeking to discriminate intentionally. What ends up happening, and there's an important example in a co-brand that was recently done between an American bank and a technological company, where the algorithm, a highly advanced algorithm with all the different variables incorporated to originate a credit card in an extremely quick way, they didn't realize that they were actually discriminating by social demographic lines, that is, men or women in this case. And one has to be very careful with that. And I do recommend, and at the bank we have spent a lot of time to make sure as possible that this doesn't happen. I think that is essential for all the companies that are seeking to incorporate all of these new technologies and algorithms in their processes. Yes, there is a book that I truly recommend you to read because I believe that this needs a lot of regulation. We can talk about regulation around the financial industry and the insurance industry, but it is not the topic at hand, nor do we have the. But there's a book that I honestly believe, and it's called Weapons of Mass Destruction. Mathematical Arms of Destruction. And it's important to read this because it has been written by a person that has created the crisis of 2018 in Wall Street. The most educated generation is declared guilty of having created algorithms that gave the people opportunity that didn't have an opportunity to buy a home. Then they sold it in the bonds that from the people that retired, and they created a debacle. And the book is really good because this essentially declares that danger because it happens in education. It essentially happens in most of the industries. So once again, we're in the face of a series of challenges that are important. I don't know if you have to wrap up right now or if you have a question. Well, I do have a question that I imagine is a question that will represent many questions from the audience, and it has to do with the current situation that we are in. And well, of course, there is a lot of uncertainty. Nobody has a crystal ball as to how we are going to leave this situation. But clearly, the impact that we are seeing of this current situation is affecting the entire world without a doubt. But it is affecting some much more than it is affecting others. It is having or generating much more inequality, and it's basically destroying the generation of value of the middle class that we had in Colombia. We're talking about actually the entire world here. And I wanted to hear from you as to how you see this from the standpoint of the US and how you see the role of technology in terms of getting out of this, or at least to start making recovery from this situation that we're undergoing. Well, honestly, I believe that we have to rethink about the basic universal services. I believe that these gaps that have opened up, even due to technology, for example, just by having 2 minutes, this pandemic showed that maybe the element of most discrimination is not having access to internet for children to be able to have access to internet and study. But the definition of what we call basic universal services such as health, education, food, and I'm not talking about right, left, communism, capitalism. No, I'm talking, or I'm saying that we have to rethink about things. And this is something that I have to recognize because there is evidence. Female leadership will have to play a much more important role because even handling pandemic in countries where it was best handled was handled by female leaders. But rethinking about universal basic services has to be done, and we have to use this crisis for that. Otherwise, the system will break. Well, Julio, it has been a pleasure to talk to you, and I hope that the audience has taken away a few of the ideas that we have shared today. So thank you very much for listening to us. Thank you, Orlando, and thanks to everyone for your time. We would like to thank Orlando Ayala and Julio Rojas Sarmiento for their interventions in this academic space, for that such an interesting conversation that they had this morning that has enriched us with their viewpoints. Thanks a lot, and may you have an excellent rest of day.